It's the fifth largest continent on Earth, and it has no native human population. It's mostly covered by ice and plays a significant role for the global climate. And it's also very unique politically. No state has sovereignty over the area or parts of it. Instead, a special treaty system regulates international relations there. Today, we are talking about Antarctica. We discuss the most important challenges for the region. We look at the possible consequences of climate change and ask what needs to be done politically to meet the challenges ahead. Therefore, we have invited two renowned and distinguished experts. One of them is Antje Boetius. Antje Boetius is a marine biologist and professor of geomicrobiology at the University of Bremen. She's also the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute, Germany's leading institution in the field of polar and marine research. In addition, this year she is a fellow of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, supporting the foundation's work with a special focus on sustainability, climate protection and innovation. Welcome, Professor Boetius, and thank you very much for joining us.
I'm glad.
We are also very pleased that our second guest has taken time for this interview. Evan T. Bloom is Senior Fellow at the Polar Institute of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. He is a lawyer and former diplomat. From 2006 to 2020, he led the US delegation to the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, the most important body regarding the political development of the region. Mr. Bloom, thank you very much for being here.
Great to be here.
Mr. Bloom, in an article in 2022, you highlighted the importance of the Antarctic Treaty System. You wrote that while governance in Antarctica is, quote, far from perfect, it is unlikely that a more effective set of treaties could be negotiated today. What are the main components of this treaty system, and what are, in your view, its major achievements?
So the Antarctic Treaty was, as a Cold War instrument, it was negotiated by 12 countries and signed in 1959, and is generally considered to be one of the most successful treaty instruments. It's taken a huge area. So the Antarctica is more than 1.5 times the size of the United States and surrounded by the huge Southern Ocean. So the area south of 60 degrees southern latitude is all covered by this treaty. And the treaty does some rather remarkable things, including demilitarizing the entire area, the entire continent, and reserving it for peace and science. In addition, a key element of this treaty system, because it's not just the Antarctic Treaty, it's some additional treaties as well, is something called the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. And it handles all the marine conservation issues, including fisheries management. So all of these things together has allowed countries of very diverse interests to work together to promote science and to get away from politics that otherwise have affected the rest of the planet.
When you talk about demilitarized area, what do you mean exactly?
Well, it means that you can't have armament there. You can have militaries, but only for science logistics purposes. And there's no real military tension within this vast area, which allows it for peaceful coexistence.
Professor Boetius, Mr. Bloom has explained to us key aspects of the Antarctic Treaty System. One important aspect is scientific research. Many countries operate research stations in the region, including Germany. You are the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute, which coordinates research activities in the region, or German research activities in the region. What makes Antarctica so interesting from a scientific point of view?
So this continent hosts the largest freshwater resource that is lying there as a frozen ice shield, as an ice mass that grows with snow that falls and compresses so that you get kilometers thick ice. And that ice is basically a global commons because it cools the planet, it reflects sunlight, and it is also cooling the circumpolar ocean so that it takes up more CO2 and hosts these amazing riches of life. And the ice that is sitting on the continent keeps the seawater levels low and basically helps us as human civilization that lives around the coast. Half of all people live around the coast of Earth, so 4 billion people. And the ice keeps the sea level low enough that our megacities, our civilization around the coasts actually work.
Professor Boetius, a few weeks ago, we interviewed you for our magazine International Reports on the effects of climate change in the Arctic. They are dramatic and clearly visible there. What is the situation in Antarctica, and what will be the consequences of continued warming of this region for the region itself, but also globally?
The meteorological stations, since quite a while, report of local warming. The average warming of the entire Antarctic is not so exciting. It is still a cool continent because when you're on it, you're measuring temperature at a great height, so at a few kilometers. So it's cold. And now we have parts of it that gets warmer and warmer. And the worst is that since a few years, we're observing a decrease of sea ice by remote sensing from satellite programs. And also remote sensing programs observe an increasing melt of the ice masses. That together is really inviting to us because our models so far have predicted that eventually Antarctica will turn and reflect the global warming as Arctica does. But mostly we thought we'll have a bit more time before it kicks in. So far it didn't kick in. And now it's kicking in at an awkward speed. So that is very disappointing in a way, because it will mean that our ways of protecting the Antarctic resources, they have to adapt to that growing climate change that we already observe.
And if this continues, what would be the consequences for globally?
Well, the US and the UK, they have with other countries led a really important project on a part, on the so-called Thrice Glacier. It's called, in the media, it's called Doomsday Glacier. And so basically the observation that some outlets of ice to the ocean exist that might speed up and have a nonlinear behavior that is meaning that they are just not representing only the warming and melting of ice, but that they can really break off huge masses so that the predicted sea level increase goes much faster than it was predicted, and that it is actually not returnable, that you can't change it anymore. And that's very worrisome because it means that we just have to be much more careful. It's actually, many people say it's not only a matter of environmental protection, it's actually a matter of our safety globally, because the predicted sea level increases would lead to a loss of the home of millions and millions of people. And that, again, is then immediately a source of problems on a political level, because even with the refugees of today, we have tensions and increasing tensions, but to know how many people could lose their homes in the coming decades, that is just mind-boggling. And hence, we are all working together with more research, better research, to be able to predict what is happening at our different trajectories of responses to climate change and the attempts to become climate neutral before half of the century.
We are meeting here in Helsinki on the sidelines of this year's Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting. Mr. Blum, can you explain to someone who is not yet familiar with Antarctica and its governance structures, who comes together at these annual meetings and what exactly is being discussed there?
So there are these, as you say, there are annual meetings, and the Antarctic Treaty calls for meetings among its parties. And there are more than 50 countries that are members of this group. And they come together once a year to talk about management of the continent, issues like tourism or environmental impacts, or management plans, operation of the science stations, and how they cooperate among each other. So a whole series of issues that relate to basically the governance of the region.
And in the political consultation on Antarctica, topics such as sustainable fishing are important, and the fight against climate change. Another important topic is the establishment of new marine protected areas. Many countries, including Germany, pursue the goal of establishing more such zones. Professor Boetius, what exactly are these marine protected zones, and what obstacles are there when it comes to establishing additional ones?
So here at the ATCM, at the Antarctic Treaty Meeting, the Commission for the Marine Living Resources, that is basically responsible for sustainable fisheries and also marine protected areas, they come and they discuss with all member states what can be done, what is the situation with the proposed marine protected areas. The US has, for example, led a giant proposal that is very important. There are also, what is discussed here is also a number of very small proposals. So countries come with their ideas. They find, for example, a unique environment on land with unique plants that do not exist anywhere, or special reserves for fish that breed, or for things that where we just say we want to have time, we want to give a protection status to that arena, and that is discussed together. And it is important, of course, because in the beginning of why Antarctica was so in the focus of political negotiations was the idea that eventually the whole of humanity must be nourished by the riches of the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. And so now we've turned it around and say, okay, maybe not that, but still it contributes to our nutrition, but it should be done in a sustainable way, so never taking more than is regrowing. And that means that usually the fisheries, the krill fisheries, the fish fisheries is below 1 or 2% of the entire standing stock, which is such a benchmark for sustainable take.
Mr. Blum, do you want to add anything?
Sure. So there's this international campaign to protect 30% of the planet, the both marine and land areas, by 2030, so-called 30 by 30 campaign. And you really can't accomplish that without having a greatly increased protection within Antarctica. And so the Southern Ocean is a vast area, and CAMLR, this commission, has taken some important initial steps, including, as you've mentioned, in 2016, the largest marine protected area was established in the Ross Sea region. And that was done by consensus of all the countries, including countries like Russia and China. But since 2016, that effort has kind of bogged down. And so there are important proposals, such as advanced by Germany in the Weddell Sea, in East Antarctica, in the Antarctic Peninsula, which are very important to this future international effort. So that means you need to get all the countries to bring consensus again, and that has proven quite difficult because some countries, namely these days China and Russia, have not been willing to go along. So there's this united front among US, Germany, EU, and lots of other countries that are demanding action at this point, and saying it's necessary to go forward.
And what do we think? How is it possible to convince such countries that it's a good idea to establish these marine protected zones?
So part of it is that CAMLR has a history of success. Back in 2014-15, it didn't look like even the Ross Sea proposal would go forward. But there was senior level engagement. On our side, we had President Obama talking to President Xi about marine protection in the Southern Ocean. And we were able to make progress at the highest level. We probably need to have that kind of engagement once again. It's very hard to have that in the middle of crises like the Ukraine war, etc. But you need that level of focus internationally, and you need to talk to countries that have doubts and try to convince them.
So it is a regular item on the G7 meetings and also the G20 meetings and also of Europe to say the Weddell Sea Marine Protected Area, that is really up high on the list, because when you look at it geographically, when you look how this part of Antarctica actually accumulates and protects sea ice, and what special habitats you will find there. Just recently, our scientists at the Alfred Wegener Institute found in 400 to 600 meters water depth the greatest area of fish breeding now known to planet Earth. So literally fish building tiny nests and breeding on eggs, important ice fish, which is a special fish to Antarctica with a very fantastic adaptation to cold water. And to know there is these basically really these enigmas of how life sustains in Antarctica, and it's very local. That is so important to understand that there are regions of Antarctica that are not the same, that are unique, and that are unique to our planet Earth, and they deserve protection. But to organize that apparently needs really strong, high-level political negotiations to move forward.
Mr. Blum, you've just mentioned the war of aggression, or Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We see as well that the tensions between the US and China are intensifying. What influence do these developments have on political talks on Antarctica?
So Antarctica is part of the world, part of the globe, and so naturally there will be some impact. There has been, however, perhaps a greater ability with respect to Antarctica to work together than we've seen in the Arctic, where we have had difficulties in the Arctic Council, and that's kind of broken down. In the context of Antarctica, where you have a treaty basis for cooperation, at least across the street we have Russians sitting down together with other countries, including Ukraine, which is an equal party, an equal consultative party, and therefore a decision-making party within the Antarctic Treaty System. So it's not exactly friendly and easy at this point, as you can imagine, but the fact that both of these countries can sit together and find a way to work at least a bit on Antarctic issues is a kind of positive sign.
Yeah, I think so too. It just when you understand what it is, a treaty between nations that is there for environmental protection and for also speaking about the value of life in the ocean, it always gives hope to me, because what else could we do as humans? It's a political undertaking that humans do to protect the greater nature of Earth, and it is the best example that this is working and is worthwhile. And I often think I wish there would be more treaties on land, so where we have also some horrible situation with the preservation of life, but we don't have such treaties as in Antarctica. So even sitting through the conferences, sometimes I just think we are not moving fast enough. And then I always think about the principle of unanimous agreement, the consensus agreement of all parties to the conference. And are you not frustrated? You've watched it such a long time. Would you defend it, or do you think it's time to let go of such consensus principles?
So you're right that the treaty system currently and has always operated on the basis of decision-making by consensus of all the parties. And with a lot of parties, it makes it difficult to reach agreement and to move forward, including on in important areas where you want to have environmental protection. At the same time, there are political values in the treaty system that the consensus principle protects. There are 7 countries that claim territory. US and Germany are 2 countries that don't claim territory in Antarctica. While consensus decision-making is difficult, it does mean that once you get everybody together, they're moving ahead with common purpose. And I fear that if one undid that principle, you would tempt countries to go it alone when it came to important decisions related to the future of the continent. And there are also this need to protect against militarization and other rising of political tensions. So I'd say that by and large, the consensus principle is not something that you should move away from easily or lightly.
Because it gives protection, right? So what actually happens if a country says, I do no longer want to be a party of the contract? Do the others have to vote on it, or how does that work?
Well, any country under international law can withdraw from a treaty, but I don't see any current prospects that anybody wants to do that, and they come together both at the Antarctic Treaty meetings and at the meetings of this Kamilar Commission to try to reach agreement. And for example, when it comes to managing the fisheries in the Southern Ocean, there have been a history of relative success. It isn't easy. Fisheries negotiations are never easy.
Right.
And yet somehow, for the most part, consensus is reached. And if you had some sort of voting process or something else, it could undermine the cohesiveness of bringing all these countries together.
Yeah. And for example, the famous and important Ross Marine Protected Area can simply not be dissolved anymore because there would never be a consensus on that by all parties, no?
Will it last for 35 years? Mm-hmm. So, and at that point, you know, there could be some sort of review that could undo it. But, you know, hopefully by that time,
we're all wiser.
We're exactly right. We're all wiser, and we understand that even more large-scale marine protection is necessary, not only in the Southern Ocean, but in other places as well. And that's what we've seen from this new High Seas Treaty that's been agreed at the UN, this move by countries to more marine protection in the interests of the entire planet.
Mr. Blum, Professor Boetius, finally, I would like to ask you both the same question. What do you see as the key challenges in Antarctica in the coming years, and what role could Europe and Germany play in addressing them?
So I guess I'd start by saying there's an overall environmental context in which Antarctic diplomacy takes place. So we have the Paris Agreement for climate change, the work that's being done in Antarctica and the science that's being done in Antarctica is vital to understanding climate change throughout the planet, and the cooperation that goes on among states leads us forward in terms of an environmental agenda internationally that I think is of growing importance to the international community. And there's also the need to make sure that key environmental rules and limitations continue to be in effect. There is a ban on any sort of mining that needs to continue within Antarctica. There needs to be perhaps a review of management of tourism, because there's been a huge ramp up in tourism in recent years. Post-pandemic, lots of ships going down there. Marine safety types of issues as well.
To me, knowing some data that we have about the state of Antarctica and the Southern Ocean, some of them indicate there is a good protection going on. For example, when it comes to plastic littering and microplastics, some of our scientists have recently found it is the cleanest part of Earth that we have. We also know from measurement it is the most silent ocean that we have left. And that's all a matter of having a treaty that works for protection. So to say also to future generations, if we do it right, as one humanity, we can keep the penguins, all the life in Antarctica from being fed with microplastics, which anywhere else on Earth is no longer possible, especially not in the Arctic, which actually accumulates microplastics through snow and sea ice. In the Antarctic, it is still clean, and we could and should keep it that way. So for me, the combined effort that we have to take as one humanity, reduce fossil fuel emission, stop the extreme warming that will harm everyone by sea level rise, but also give that protection to the wonderful and endemic unique life we have there. Those are important missions, and that we have a treaty system, that we have these conferences and working together gives hope.
And do you see a special role for Europe in this context?
For Europe, we have recently managed to come up with this idea of Fit for 55, the biggest climate protection package ever, We have an emission trade that works and will work even better in the future when the prices go up. And we have new sets of environmental rules that will also matter for the oceans worldwide. And if Germany could just be very ambitious with fulfilling the European package, we will have a chance. We will also have a chance for our economy and businesses, because it's all about innovation in all kinds of processes and trade and everything. And I really hope in that matter that US will challenge us further in Europe with equal ambition to become climate neutral eventually. It's all about friendly competition, no?
Well, it's not only competition. I would say that Europe has a very strong environmental consciousness. And EU, I think, has led the way in trying to find a way for diverse countries to work together environmentally. And that is the sort of principle that you need to apply in Antarctica. But I think neither European states nor the US pay enough attention to Antarctica. It's very far away. There are all these penguins down there. No one really understands, what's going on. But in fact, there's a close relationship between the environment. There's the sea level rise issue, but these environmental issues are global. And that's why all of these things come together, and it's worth the kind of political energy that ought to be brought to bear by Northern Hemisphere countries.
Absolutely. I was referring to the question of the state investing in green technologies, which gives Europe a headache, of course. But I find it important that there is an ambition, because every ton of CO2 we are saving that is not produced elsewhere is a good one for Antarctica. And so that, to me, is the most important thing we can actually organize.
Thank you very much, Professor Boetius. Thank you very much, Mr. Blum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ein Angebot der Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung.